my parents' marriage didn't work.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of issues, and I have a brother that is in an institution, and is my schizophrenic brother is nonverbal. He has not spoken in years. He was homeless for many years. I watched him OD on the streets of Los Angeles. I mean, my teen years were rough.
Yeah.
My father's mental illness was really rough, and that was right in my face,
Yeah.
Watching this person that's supposed to be this leader of your household and this strong figure, just watch him crumble and not have that example was really hard.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world? I would like to welcome you back to the Real Talk with Zuby podcast. On today's episode, we have got on a special guest. I've been looking forward to having a conversation with this young lady for a while. She is awesome. She's the host of the comment section at the Daily Wire, and this is Brett Cooper.
I'm so happy to be here.
So happy to see you. How you doing?
I'm excellent. How about yourself?
I am always good.
Amazing.
Always good.
We've had a fun week. I got to see you at the Am I Racist premiere here in Nashville, which was awesome. So we're looping in some podcasts, which was great, but it was fun.
Absolutely. Brett, I'm sure vast majority of my audience will already know who you are, but for the uninitiated, please introduce yourself.
I'm Brett Cooper. I host the comment section over at the Daily Wire. It is a daily news, pop culture commentary show. Basically, if something is going viral online, if there's a pattern that I'm noticing online, we cover it, and I try to extract a deeper meaning to give to my audience. I think the most important thing to me when covering those types of subjects, if you don't watch my show, is trying to educate my audience and internet, consumers of the subliminal messages of the stories that they're seeing happen online and the trends that they're seeing online. So we're not just oblivious consumers. We're not just scrolling and subconsciously taking in all of these ridiculous trends and messages and themes, but that we actually are understanding the content that we are watching. So understanding the deeper meaning of these trends and what that means in a broader cultural sense. So that's kind of my way of still enjoying pop culture and sharing that with the world, and obviously being engaged with what's going on social media and in my generation, but being able to make it a bit more meaningful. So that's what we do at the comment section. I work at Daily Wire. We have a great time.
Today's episode is brought to you by Bitbox. As I'm sure you've noticed by now, inflation is a major issue. The more money that central banks print, the less your dollars, pounds, and euros are worth. When it comes to government-issued fiat currency, inflation is inevitable. That's why for many years I've been saving in Bitcoin. It's scarcer than gold, and it cannot be inflated by any central bank. But if you're going to buy and hold Bitcoin, it's vital that you store it securely, because leaving your coins on exchanges is risky and leaves them vulnerable to potential hacks. That's where today's sponsor, Bitbox, comes in. Bitbox is a Swiss-made hardware wallet that allows you to store your Bitcoin easily and safely. It only takes a few minutes to set up a wallet and take full custody of your coins the same way I do. Secure your Bitcoin today with a Bitbox. Go to bitbox.swiss/Zuby to get 5% off a hardware wallet today. That's bitbox.swiss/Zuby for 5% off. How did you get into this whole world? So I know you started out in acting.
Yes.
So how did you end up at this point where you're doing social, cultural, sometimes political commentary?
I was an actor for 10 years. I was a child actor, lived out in Los Angeles.
Uh-oh.
I know, child actor, dangerous territory. I thank my mom every day for being as strict as she was. She was the strictest stage mom, if you would even call her that. She was a stage mom in that she protected me from everything that the other stage moms were pushing their kids into. But no, I was a child actor for 10 years, and I went to college at UCLA. And at that point, I had already kind of decided that acting might not be the long-term thing for me. I loved it as a child, and it felt like a hobby more than anything. It's what I love more than anything. I love storytelling. I love diving into a character. I love the whole film industry. I love how creative it is. I love how meaningful stories are and how they can connect with an audience, which is, I think, why I love doing my show so much, because what I do is tell stories and connect with an audience. So I think that's kind of how I bridge that gap. But I love that part of it. And I loved it when the stakes were not high. Like, I loved it when I was a kid and it was not having to be my main source of income. And then as I got older, I emancipated myself at 15 for a myriad of reasons. But at 15, I had to start thinking about providing for myself and thinking of it as a long-term career. And I looked at the people around me in Hollywood, the adults that I was working with on shows, and the way that they were never able to see their kids because they might be in Canada shooting a TV show for 4 months out of the year, or 30-year-old actors that would be on shows with me, and they were, a series regular on a Netflix show, but were living in a townhome with 5 other adults. I was like, that's not the future that I want for myself. I want a family. I want stability. That was really hard. So by the time I'd gotten to college, I already kind of had a foot out the door and was like, okay, what else could I do? Maybe I could go into production. I could be a producer or screenwriter. So I started doing internships at production companies, and then that was 2020. So I was working at a production company, and I just got so disheartened with the entire industry because I remember working at this production company. Literally my dream job. At that point, I had told my mom, I told my friends, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to fight to get a full-time job after I graduated at this production company. And I remember sitting there and we got an email during all the BLM stuff, and they said, we're going to scrap a huge percentage of the projects that we're working on. You need to go find diverse scripts. Because my job was to read the scripts as they came in the door and decide whether they were going to be pushed on to the producers. And I would do a breakdown and I would analyze them and say, does this fit what we do here? And they said, scrap all of that. You need to find a Native American story. We need to have more Black women in these stories. So it became less about the story and connecting with the audience and more about how many boxes can we check because we don't have enough diverse people. We have a bunch of white stories. We can't have those anymore. We're scrapping them. You need to go find this Native American story. And it just felt so fake and manipulated. And then that same year was when the Oscars came out with their new guidelines of if you want to be nominated for an Academy Award, you have to check all of these boxes. You need to have this many, people of color on your crew and this many people of color in the cast, or you need to have an LGBTQ representation. And it became so manufactured, and it wasn't actually about telling genuine stories. So at that point, I was like, okay, I'm out. Which sucks because, I had been acting professionally since I was 8 years old. It was all I knew. And again, it's my first love. I feel alive when I act. I feel alive when I'm engaging in that industry. And so I did what any liberal arts student would do. And I said, okay, I'm going to go to law school because I don't know what else I'm going to do with my life. So I spent the last year of college throughout 2020 and 2021, studying for the LSAT and doing that. I took the LSAT. I got into a couple law schools. And then I decided, my mom had just moved to Idaho and she had bought a homestead there. And I decided, okay, if she's not going to be in California anymore, I'm certainly not going to be in California alone. This place is bonkers. I'm leaving. So I went to Idaho, and on the last day that you could apply, I applied to their University of Idaho Law School, and I was going to do a JD MBA program. So I'd be there for 4 years, and I would get a JD and a master's of business. And on the day of my orientation, I withdrew. And I was just like, Brett, this is not what you're meant to be doing. You should not be a lawyer. I had also talked to I wanted to go into constitutional law and do 2A law.
Oh, wow.
So by that point, I had already been really invigorated by everything going on with COVID. I'd become a lot more politically engaged. I was writing for Foundation for Economic Education. I was working for PragerU. I was doing some things for Young Americans for Liberty. It felt like my way to find community and find common sense while living and going to school in a very, very liberal environment where I felt very, very alienated, and I lost a lot of my friends. So by search of community is kind of how I landed in this whole world. And I decided, I can't go to law school. This is not for me. And I talked to these constitutional lawyers, and they had said, you're already writing articles. You're making videos for PragerU. You're doing fundraising for Young Americans for Liberty. You have all of this on-camera acting experience. You can do literally everything that we do as advocates for 2A and for the Constitution except sign the briefs. So why would you put your life on hold for 4 more years, stop all the connections that you have just so that you can sign the paperwork, basically, and make barely any money? And they're like, there's too many lawyers, which is very true. And I learned that later when looking at how the government manages graduate schools' subsidized loans, and they have limitless subsidized loans for graduate schools, which means that you can take out as much money as you want, which means that basically every university and its mother has created a law school, which means that there are too many JDs coming out of these law schools and not enough legal jobs. So it is just a completely ballooned industry. So all of that went into this decision. And so then I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. I was working.
How old were you at this time?
I was 19, about to turn 20.
Okay.
Because I graduated early. And so I was 19 years old, living in Idaho, had just moved there 6 months earlier, withdrew from graduate school before I had even started. I was working as a waitress at a at a wine bar in Boise, which was still one of my favorite jobs. And I was doing all these things on the side and making these little social media videos and writing for fee. And I basically just told my mom I just need a few months to figure it out. And it was the first time in my life that I didn't have a plan, which is so rare for me because I'm such a structured, person. I have my 10-year plan. It's going to go exactly how I want it to. And I just really felt like I was flailing. And I had moved out and was like, I guess I'll just go meet a guy in Idaho and I'll just, work for these conservative nonprofits, maybe have a marketing job. I'll be fine. And then Daily Wire slid into my DMs.
Okay.
Wild.
That's how it starts.
Exactly. It's how every good romance starts. And it was so, I did not think it was real, but they had seen, one of their social media managers had seen the short Instagram type videos that I had been posting for Young Americans for Liberty and for PragerU. And they reached out and they said, we are looking for somebody young who has a fresh new voice and we'd love to start a show with somebody like that. Would you like to, come in and we could see if we could make something work? We'd love to talk with you. And I immediately wrote back and I was like, yeah, sure, of course. And so then I went through this kind of interview process, but it wasn't really an interview. We, met and we kind of threw around ideas and I wanted to see where I saw my career going, which at this point I was just, spewing things off the top of my head because I was like, I can't believe this is happening. But then this is one of my favorite stories, is that I almost did not actually send in the audition tape. I was terrified. So Daily Wire had kind of been in the back of my mind for the last year. And I had applied to multiple jobs. I had applied to be Candace's assistant. I had applied to be two different producer roles on Ben's show. I just wanted to be in the door. I was like, you guys are doing amazing things. I just want to be around you.
This is all before they DM'd you?
Yes,
okay.
yeah. And I got denied from all of those.
Interesting.
Yes, I didn't even get a response, which is totally fine. God works in mysterious ways, obviously. And so I thought, okay, maybe not for me. So I had, I wanted to be there and I wanted to work for them. And I think that the pressure of it and how real it was and how much I revered and admired Daily Wire and all of these, people who worked for them, I think it just got too much. I was like, I'm not ready. This just feels like I'm out of my league. And they wanted me to film some long form reactions, kind of an off the cuff version of what Comment Section turned out to be. And I just didn't film it, and I was paralyzed. I was like, I'm just not gonna do it. I'm sure that they're talking to a million other people. They weren't. And so I'm just not even gonna give it a try. And my mom yelled at me, literally, brought me over to her house. She said, I don't care if you end up not taking the job. I don't care if you decide that you never want to leave Idaho. If you just want to live here and meet some guy and you want to work on, our farm and do whatever. We have this family farm there. I don't care if that's perfect. That's fine. But you can't walk away from at least trying. You can't, because this opportunity will never come back. And I was like, okay, you're right. So I did it. Obviously ended up getting hired and I moved to Nashville within 3 weeks, which is crazy. Packed up, bought a new car, I bought a 4Runner so that I could pack all my stuff in the back of it. I did a tiny crossover. Moved across the country, and then we started the show at the beginning of February, just a few months later. So it was an absolutely crazy ride. Did not expect it in the slightest. It was a big leap of faith. And trusting that, this was the right path, and it came at a time when I really didn't know what my future held, and I didn't ever think that I would be able to go back to acting, and I didn't think that I would ever want to. I didn't think that I would even be able to have a foot in that storytelling industry and be able to, use that part of myself and what I had been doing for the last 10 years, and this just felt like the most perfect harmony of it, because I was getting to be, honest with my values and what I believed. I wasn't having to hide that anymore, which I was in Hollywood. I was able to work with people that I really revered and respected, and I felt like I was doing something for the common good and encouraging young people and empowering them, while simultaneously getting to be, on camera and engage with an audience and tell stories and write. I get to write every day for my show, which is just the best. So it was meant to be, but it was a crazy ride getting there because, again, for the first time in my life, I had no idea, which is wild to say at, 19 years old. But as somebody who was so anal about, this is how my life's going to go, I felt like I was in free fall, and then it just came at the perfect moment. So yeah, That's the very long-winded story.
And here we are.
Yeah, exactly.
But at the same time, it's happened pretty quickly.
Very, yeah.
You've grown, you've got over 4 million subscribers now on YouTube, and yeah, tons of people know who you are. What's that ride been like? What's that journey been like over these last few years?
Unprecedented is probably the best word to use. I'm very grateful. It was very overwhelming at first, not from the standpoint of, I'm not, prepared for this or anything like that, because ironically, and I don't know if there's a way to say this without feeling egotistical, but I think that my mom did, a great job at this. Because I grew up in the acting world, we constantly had discussions about fame, because I saw it with many friends of mine. They would book a show and overnight people knew who they were. Yep. And so my mom never wanted that to come as a surprise for me, because there would be times when I would be 4 auditions in for series regular on some TV show, or we find out that I have had with Marvel movies and movies of that caliber, they always hide the movie that you're auditioning for, and they don't actually give you the script, so you're just kind of like auditioning for a fake movie, basically. So I realized like 2 months in that I was, in the running for a Wolverine movie. Anyway, so like that stuff was all very close and tangible. So we would have those conversations a lot of, what boundaries would you put in place if this happened? What about yourself would you give to the public? What does fame mean? So that was something that we had been talking about for a long time. And then when I left acting, I thought I'm never going to have to use that. Yeah. And then suddenly, faster than I could have ever expected. I mean, we had 1 million subscribers within 5 months.
Yeah, that's nuts.
No, yeah, and it's just, instantly I had people knowing who I was and stopping me on the street. And I remember one day I went to Costco and I was in my pajamas and I had multiple people stop me. And then I had somebody DM me and be like, I saw you in Costco in your pajamas. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so weird. Yeah. But because of the conversations that we had had for so long, I feel like I've been able to stay grounded. And I think the thing that grounds me more than anything is just an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I am so grateful for the platform that I have. I feel like I just have such a great responsibility, and I'm so honored, and I take that so seriously. And it means so much to me, especially when I meet young women. I always say that's, like, I love everybody who watches the show, and I'm so grateful for everyone, but the demographic, that's such a weird marketing term to use, but I said that to somebody once when I met them in person. I was like, I'm sorry, I don't mean to like put you in like a demographic. But when I meet young women, when I meet them and, they're teenagers, they're in college, and they come up to me and they say, you've given me the confidence to speak up about my values. You make me feel less alone. You've given me somebody to relate to. It's like, it just hits me like a ton of bricks because that's what I didn't have. Growing up in a very left-wing city, in a very left-wing industry, not just to make it about politics, but just in a city, in an industry where my values were not represented in the slightest.
Well, you mean it socially and culturally,
yes,
too. It's
exactly.
Not a hard political thing.
Exactly. And it's more socially and culturally than anything else because at 15 years old, I wasn't thinking about politics. I wasn't, thinking about voting for Trump when I was 15 or 16. I wasn't thinking about Obama. I would hear my mom make, offhanded comments, but we were a very philosophically driven family and culturally driven family rather than like hard news and politics. We never listened to the news. We never did anything like that. But we read a lot and we debated a lot. And we talked about values a lot. And I remember growing up and, not seeing the values that my family held in anybody else. And just feeling like I was a crazy person all throughout.
What were those values?
Valuing family is a big one. Respecting your parents. Just bare minimum things. The biggest one for me as a young woman was how promiscuous all of my female friends were. And I grew up in that world, and as a result, I felt like to be a woman, you either were incredibly feminine, which I equated as weakness as a young woman. So I never wanted to be that because I thought, I'm a tomboy. I have 3 older brothers. I can never be that. I don't want to wear dresses. I remember my high school best friend saw me wearing a dress for the first time. We were at Priscilla's Coffee in Burbank, California, and it's like ingrained in my brain because she had never seen me wear a dress before. And she was like, that is so weird. There was that side of femininity, and then the other side of femininity, the only other example that I had been given was being incredibly sexual and incredibly promiscuous at a very young age. My friends started sleeping around literally at 13 years old. At 13 years old, they were having sex in LA, in the industry. And their parents were aware of it and okay with it and putting their, teenage 13, 14-year-old girls on birth control. Abortion was a very, very openly discussed issue, and even though at the time I would have called myself more pro-choice, purely because I, didn't want the government involved in my decisions about my body. I knew that it was a moral wrong, and the way that these young girls and their families would talk about it with such, a nonchalant attitude. And so, it was shocking. Yeah. And then, personal responsibility and accountability, that was a big one, just the lack thereof. Being solely driven by fame was another one. I just felt like everybody in that world was very superficial, was not grounded in the slightest, and it was just a hard world to grow up in. And so I felt like I was kind of in this bubble with my mom. Like I would go out into the world and I would be, on sets, be with all these actors, be with my acting friends and all that stuff. And I would come home. It was like every night we would sit at the table and discuss everything that I had seen, and I'd have to ask her all these questions of I don't know what this means. Why are they acting this way? Anyway, so that we had very lively conversations. But I didn't have anybody that I related to. And my mom would give me articles from FEE, Foundation for Economic Education, where I ended up working later on to read the Hillsdale University Journal. We subscribed to that, so she would give me that to read. So I would get to read, essays from those professors and the college students that were at Hillsdale. I read a lot of Ayn Rand. My mom studied, she's a student of objectivism right after college. She went to New York and studied under a couple of Ayn Rand's prodigies. And so, we discussed a lot of those topics. I just read voraciously. But I didn't have anybody in pop culture or in media that felt like me.
Yes.
And so when those young girls come up to me, I feel like I'm doing exactly what I should be doing. And I feel like I've kind of made it in a way because I'm providing that. And I was in such a desperate need for it. So I think that's how I'm able to stay grounded and what keeps me motivated. Because I want to set a good example and I want to lead by example. I want to continue empowering them, and I don't take that responsibility lightly, and I'm so grateful for it.
And you shouldn't take it lightly.
No, it's.
Yeah. Well, firstly, I want to say congratulations.
Thank you.
No, seriously. Seriously. Like I don't know you that well, but I'm genuinely proud of you.
Thank you.
I'm like, this is awesome. I love the fact that you are out there doing what you're doing, and that it's getting so much attention, and that you are inspiring and motivating people. Because in this day and age, gosh, I think even more so for young women than young men. Like we hear a lot about the attack on masculinity and the absence of decent masculine role models and the boy crisis and all of this, and it's all real.
Yeah.
But maybe because I'm a man, I can at least see clearly who there are a lot of good, positive male role models out there, even in the celebrity and public figure world. But for young women, maybe I'm just a little bit blind to it. But if I look at the people who they're looking up to and following, and it's like it's either incredibly materialistic and superficial, and or it's degenerate.
It is 100%.
So that exists in the male world too. But I just
it's far more obvious in the female world, I would say. And I think you make a great point. There are a lot of male role models popping up, and obviously the boy crisis does exist. I've talked about it a lot, but I think that ignoring women has been a fault, and I think we've been doing that for many years, which really sucks. And it was, I'm trying to think of who were the women that I looked up to as a teenager. I loved Reese Witherspoon.
Okay.
Reese Witherspoon was my idol. I wanted to have a production company like her. I loved her book club. I loved the fact that she was this Southern woman from Tennessee and was very classy. But that was that genuinely is the one person that I can really think of. And I would watch, YouTubers, and I would have celebrities that I would be interested in. And there were a lot of actresses whose careers I respected.
Yes.
And who I think are just brilliant and incredibly talented, but I would look at the way that they live their personal life and the things that they talk about and what they represent, and I just can't stand by that. And I think that there are fewer women in this space talking about culture, talking about ideology, talking about politics than there are men. I think that this has been.
Yeah, well, I think it's a weird one because almost by definition, most conservative women who are living conservative lives are not going to be out there on Instagram and YouTube and TikTok and whatever. Almost by definition, it's kind of why the whole trad thing is kind of funny to me.
Yes,
because I'm
those aren't actually trad wives.
I'm like, can you have 6 million followers and be trad? That's
and not work, be a stay-at-home mom. Yeah, exactly. Well, that's part of the whole that trad thing has just become an aesthetic, and it's a good aesthetic because I think that it's inspiring a lot of women, and I would rather they have that example
than twerking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I think that is a very important thing to point out because I think we get lost in that. That reminds me, though, another great example is Ballerina Farm, and she gets attacked constantly online, and she's villainized. Nothing that she does is right, and they just hate her for the fact that she is who she is.
I don't even know who she is. I've heard everyone talking about her, but I don't think I've ever actually seen a
You should go check her out. She's lovely, and she handles everything with such class and such grace. She's a former ballet dancer, went to Juilliard, got married young. They're Mormon. I think that they have 8 kids now, but they left their big New York careers. I think her husband was an investment banker at the time, and they had this dream to start a farm and raise their family in Utah on this farm, and it's been built into this incredible brand and an incredible business. And I think that they make a lot of money selling their products, and it is a brand in and of itself, but I think that the brand that triggers most people because of how powerful it is the brand of her being a loving mother and a loving wife and having that be her place of fulfillment.
How dare she?
Yeah, of like leaving, the gall to leave New York and the gall to leave her ballet career before it really had even started, because she got pregnant her last year at Juilliard. She was the first Juilliard student to ever be pregnant as she was graduating. And like that is the most awful thing that she's ever done.
But women really hate on each other, man.
They do. Oh, it's so catty. It's the worst. It's so.
I've said before. I think most misogynists are actually female.
Yes, they are.
I think there's more female misogynists than male ones.
Yeah, women hate each other, and then the other thing, women set the unhealthy, unrealistic standards and then blame men for them.
Yes.
The beauty standards, the dating standards, the way that they go out and dress in public. Now, while there are caveats and women will, dress incredibly provocatively and slutty to go out and meet a guy at a bar, the majority of the time they're doing that because they want the attention of other girls, because other girls are, raising that bar to that level. Yeah. And they're seeing it online. And so that's why I think it's so important to just be a normal woman and put that online. So you don't really have to do that. And if your, gut reactions to turn around and blame men, it's, you should probably check yourself. But one thing I will say is that there has been such an increase of young women in this space. And I think that it's just the greatest thing. I mean, we have, people like Isabel Brown, and we have people like Alex Clark, who just launched her new show and her new brand, and she's focusing more on the health space, which is really cool. Riley Gaines just burst out onto the scene, obviously, a couple of years ago, and she's brilliant. But I look around now, and I'm so excited for this next generation of young women, because there are so many of us in this space, and so many who I genuinely know to be such wonderful women in real life, on camera and off camera, who, we're all kind of working in different spaces, but they all complement each other. And it just makes me so happy, because again, like 10 years ago, even 8 years ago, 6 years ago, there was not that. It was, the women on Fox News were the women that I could sort of look up to. I remember saying at one point that I felt like the two types of women that I saw in conservative media when I would try to seek out like a woman's take on politics, especially during 2020, I would see like the really badass like huntresses in Montana, and they would be all decked out in camo, and they'd be on their dad's ranch. It was super sick, and I was like, okay, that's awesome, and I want to go hunt, but that's not really me. And then I would see, all the Trump intern girls, kind of like how I call them, the DC Republicans in their beautiful pencil skirts, and they're like perfectly blown out hair, and they're like on flights to Mar-a-Lago. I was like, they're so beautiful, but that's also not me. I'm just like, I'm normal. And I think we have that now, which is so cool. So I have a lot of hope because of that, because I do just feel like I'm surrounded by so many amazing peers. So I do think that that's a win in and of itself.
Yeah, I think what's actually my big prediction for like Gen Z and the generations below them, what I really foresee, honestly, this century is a massive bifurcation in humanity. I think you're going to just see a divide like never before.
Yeah.
So I often get asked if I'm optimistic about the future or about younger generations, and I'm extraordinarily optimistic for maybe half of them, and extraordinarily pessimistic about the other half. And sadly, this is not all even down to them. This is down to who their parents are.
Yeah.
This is down to the family they're growing up in, the media they're consuming, which, there's some control over. How much time they're spending in front of screens, what age they're given a smartphone at. There are people, I know parents who are like, I'm not giving my child a smartphone until they're 18, some 16. And I know
iPad babies.
There's 4-year-olds who have their own smartphone with access to the internet and social, which is 4.
It's mind-boggling.
Like that you're not even at school yet.
Yeah.
And so
it's so destructive.
Yeah, I mean, for my entire life and before, people have always talked about like income gaps and wealth gaps and stuff. But I think you're going to see that'll continue. But you're going to see attention gaps. Yeah. You're going to see massive health gaps. You're going to have people who are
the health is such a huge one. Yeah.
Mental health, physical health, spiritual health. You're going to have some people who are more unhealthy than anyone ever before.
And that goes into how they literally are able to function in society. You will have the people that are, that are leaders, that are hopeful, that are optimistic, that are the movers and shakers. And then you have the people, as we're seeing now, that will be so unhealthy, mind, body, and spirit, that they cannot move forward. Yeah. They are constantly living in that victim cycle, which is only holding all of us down. And I think that, to me, is the biggest divide that I see, because I do see so many people in Gen Z. I was actually asked this at the Am I Racist premiere. Somebody said, like, why do you have hope for Gen Z?
Yeah.
And Gen Z is so independently minded, which to half of them, they think that they're so independent because they follow left-wing media. I'm like, that's not actually, like, yeah, exactly. I'm like, okay, you're following the corporate media. That's not really the rebellion. But there is a large majority that are actually independent, in how they think and how they operate, and the fact that they're willing to go against the tide where, Gen Z is pushing the resurgence of smartphones. They're not drinking as much, which some people argue is because they're less social, which is true. But I think that there's also a big majority that are not drinking because of health things, doing less drugs, sleeping around less, which also could be more of a social thing. So that's a double-edged sword. But the big thing that I've seen is my generation now looking at Generation Alpha and seeing the iPad kids and actually seeing Gen Alpha come into classrooms and the way that they're acting. And Gen Z is going, oh my gosh, we are never going to raise our kids like this. We need to stop this. Like, we cannot have another generation of these iPad kids. They're so entitled. Yep. They have no respect. They take no responsibility. This is insane. Teachers are quitting right and left because they can't deal with Gen Alpha. And watching Gen Z.
Gen Alpha is what age and younger?
Oh gosh, I think that it's... So I think Gen Z probably ends around 18. I think it's like teens. No, maybe even younger.
Yeah, it would be younger,
like
right?
14 probably down,
14
I would say.
Younger. Okay.
That's the majority of what I see, but I should actually learn those specific numbers. But they're looking at the millennials that are raising their kids like this in the generation right above millennials, and Gen Z is kind of looking around and they're like, man, we are where things can change because we're now watching what's happening. We're seeing what happens when you give kids technology at this young age, and when you do gentle parenting, which for a lot of people is actually just lazy enabling parenting and letting your kids walk all over you. So I do think that there's a big opportunity for Gen Z to wake up and say we're going to be the ones.
Today's podcast is sponsored by my book, Strong Advice, Zuby's Guide to Fitness for Everybody. When it comes to health, exercise, and nutrition, there are a huge number of resources available. Some are great, but others, not so much. The problem with a lot of fitness advice is it's unnecessarily complicated. This can leave you feeling even more confused, with underwhelming and unsustainable results. Most diets fail, and even when they do work, most people simply regain the weight. Strong Advice is different because the sole goal of the book is to help you and not to confuse you. It's simple enough for beginners, but detailed enough for experienced lifters. No nonsense, just valuable information. Strong Advice has already helped thousands of people to achieve and maintain their fitness goals, and whether your goal is to lose fat, build muscle, or just get in better shape, it can help you too. Visit zubyfitness.com to get $10 off the ebook or audiobook version of Strong Advice. That's zubyfitness.com, and as a loyal podcast listener, you'll automatically get $10 off. Enjoy the rest of the podcast. Gen Z are in such an interesting and unique position, right? Because I'm a millennial, and we millennials, we are the last generation who lived in the pre-internet, pre-smartphone, pre-social media world, and then also in this one, whereas with Gen Z, that stuff has always been there. If I think of it even myself, I've been on social media in some form since 2004.
Wow.
Which is pretty wild. So I joined Facebook, I think, September 2004.
So specific. I love it.
Yeah, I know. I very specifically remember because I was in my first year of university.
Okay.
And I...
but see, that's so important because you were already basically developed.
Exactly.
You were becoming an adult.
Yes.
Which is honestly when we all should join social media.
And then YouTube started the following year. We had MySpace around that time, and Facebook started to suck people away. I remember I had I remember having 28,000 friends on MySpace. I remember that. I can
took it all away from you.
Yeah, I can remember. And so I've just seen such an interesting shift in that regard, and it's all just a massive experiment. I mean, it's really. When was the first iPhone released? 2006.
I was going to say 6 or 7.
I think so, about 18 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I think now people are increasingly aware of the effects of social media, the effects of smartphones and so on. But it's just this massive experiment that's been running worldwide. And I think Gen Z, those who are clued up, and younger millennials, you can see, oh, okay, this is what is going on. This is what it's doing to people. And when you then go on to raise your own children, you now have that awareness.
Yeah,
which
we're watching it in action.
Yes, it's very much in real time, and you can. I'll tell you where I even started to notice it because I used to sell my CDs on the street in the UK. So I used to go out every day, travel to different cities, and I would talk to thousands of people every week. I've probably met between 400 and 500,000 people over the years while I was out there selling my CDs. And I used to talk to tons of teenagers. And I started to notice maybe around 2017, maybe, I started to notice a real shift in teenagers' abilities to communicate face to face.
Yeah.
Like I started to notice, like I'm talking to them and like I'm speaking to them and they're not making eye contact and they're just super awkward, or they don't want to talk to you and they just want to look you up online.
Yep.
And you're like, I'm standing right here.
We can literally have a conversation.
They're like, I'd rather look you up on YouTube. And you're just like, this is strange. This didn't used to happen.
Yeah.
And I've seen it. I'm from a massive family. I've got lots of cousins, and I've had some cousins and who, they spend so much time just looking at the screens that they're just not socially calibrated.
Yeah.
They don't know how to just sit down and have a conversation like we're having right now. They're bored within 2 minutes.
Yep.
They give you one-word answers. You try to ask them how's school going, what's that, and they just
shut down.
They're just not interested, and they want to just grab the iPad or play the PlayStation or whatever. And I'm just like, this is not good.
No.
Like, this is scary.
And the crazy thing to me is that there will be parents online who will talk about their decisions in regards to technology and how they raise their kids. So, our kids have to put their phone in a basket at this time of the evening, and they are only able to have this one social media platform, and we monitor it. We go through their phone, whatever it may be. Yeah. Or they don't get a phone until they're 16 years old. And there will be a lot of people that will say, oh, yeah, that's very reasonable. But overwhelmingly so, the comments that I see on those videos are people being livid and literally calling these parents abusive. And these are teenagers who are living through that right now. Like my generation and a little younger, my age range and a little younger, literally calling these parents abusive. And you look at that and you're like, oh my gosh, you were so
brainwashed.
Yes, into thinking that this is normal, that this is okay, or that your parent doesn't have the right to protect you. I remember saying this on my show at one point, but if you can point me to literally only one study that says that social media or phone usage in young people, in undeveloped brains, is a net positive, then okay, then we can have a conversation. But you can't, because they literally do not exist. No. Every single one. Maybe there's like a neutral one. Oh, they're using, an educational game. But they will always have the caveat of too much time online. I mean, it's not just for young, undeveloped mind, for all of us.
Everybody.
Is so unhealthy.
Yeah.
And we're so brainwashed into thinking that because we just can't have what we want at all times, and that's abusive. We're so disconnected. No, you're not. You are just only believing that you can be connected in one way.
Yes.
Go outside, make friends, which is just then, a whole other can of worms, because we don't know how to make friends. I think that's one of the biggest issues in dating with my generation, is we literally do not know how to date.
Okay, tell me more about that.
I've told the story a couple of times recently, and I had not thought about it in ages until somebody sat down and asked me about it. My first dating experiences were online as a teenager. I was not asked out in person. So my now husband and then one other guy asked me out in person.
Okay.
Everything else was, I was on Hinge.
Easy picking, fellas.
Yeah.
Get your street game up.
Exactly.
Go up to these girls in real
rare.
Life. Yeah.
It was like Snapchat and Instagram DMs. And even if I met somebody in person, we might connect in real life the first time, all
move online.
Flirting. Yeah, exactly. There was nothing in person. And that wasn't just during COVID. It was before COVID. And then I had a boyfriend during COVID, a college boyfriend, met him online. Even in Greek life, I was in Greek life for a whopping 1 year. I went out with a couple of guys that I met through my sorority, but I met them all online through my sorority, in Greek life group chats and that kind of thing. And it's so weird. And so I was sitting with this and I was thinking about it, and I was like, we have not been trained how to flirt in real life. Like everybody, when you read articles about dating in the modern era, or you see people making videos about their struggles, it's like, well, he isn't texting me back and he texts in a weird way. Do you think this is cold, or do you think this is him being flirty? Everything is now changed to all of the social cues are online, where they used to be in person, and we're not even getting asked out in person. Mm-hmm. And obviously part of that is that many men are afraid that, they'll get Me Too'd if they ask women out in person.
I think that's a bit of a cope,
I think so as well.
I think it's a bit of a cope.
Because, and even though there are women out there, that are terrible and that will do that, I think a lot of that goes back to the same idea that we weren't trained how to do it, because men don't know how to ask out women in person. They don't know how to approach, and then how to know the social cues of, yes, she's interested. Okay, no, maybe she's not. Let me walk away and not be creepy. Because it's like, I've been followed around even before people knew who I was. I was like followed around Home Depot by a guy. Like, could I ask, could I get your number? And like not understanding that I was saying no. And I was like, okay, that's what we're saying. That is creepy. But just you coming up to me, that's not weird. We just all have to learn these social cues, which via being online for so many years and then COVID being locked in our homes, we've lost all ability to do that. I think a lot of older people have lost it, and younger people were never trained from the get-go.
Yes.
So we're all just screwed.
It's so interesting. I'm thinking of what you were just saying about guys approaching in real life and the sort of fear about, post-Me Too, all this kind of stuff. And, I think it's had a sort of, what's the best way to put this? Kind of like a disproportionate impact. Because I would imagine that the guys who need to worry about the sort of Me Too type situations just don't care, right? Like they'll just kind of do whatever and approach however anyway.
And they don't care about the social cues.
The sort of normal guys, which is the majority, who wouldn't come off in a sort of nasty, creepy way, or who already would know not to follow a woman around a store like that, they're now just like, ooh, they're more
they've been
put off.
Impacted by this whole, all the numbers that say women, will Me Too you if you do. Yeah, it's very, and it's difficult for both men and women, because I empathize with men for that, because it's very scary. And already asking a woman out, regardless, it's so hard.
Women don't know how women massively underestimate that as well.
Yes. It's like, just ask me out. It's not like...
Because women don't need to approach. So.
No. But I do think that women these days do need to. Or at least what I've been telling my female followers...
Indicator of interest.
Yes. Be open. Yes. At least it's like you can't be on your phone like here I am, hunched over like this, and then complain that guys aren't approaching you. Yeah. It's like, again, the social cues. Understand.
If there's any, look, I'll give it straight to it. If there's any young women who are genuinely confused about this, because people lie to women all the time, but I'll tell the truth here. If you're interested in a guy and you give him a somewhat obvious hint that you're interested, if he is interested and has a shred of confidence, he will recognize that and act on it. So that's all. But you do need to give the indicator of interest.
And it can be as simple as looking. It can be as simple as the way that you hold yourself and the way that you smile. And women are always so weird about that. Like, don't tell me to smile. No. Please smile. Please. Yeah. Number one, you do look prettier. Number two, that is an indication to men that you are interested, that you are open, that you are available. It's flirting. Yeah. I mean, that basically is making the first move, and women will often be like, I don't want to make the first move. You have to. Yeah. You have to give that indication.
Most men will initiate if...
Assuming a signal.
Yes. There has to be a signal.
Yeah.
There are guys like if a guy's like a pickup artist style, or he's got like extreme confidence, then he may approach completely cold with no indicator of interest. But typically there needs to be an indicator, because it's funny. Women, I know everyone always talks about like how women are scared of men, and I understand that, like physically, and men can be dangerous and so on. I understand that. But they underestimate how intimidated the average man is by how intimidated the average man is by women.
And I wish women would take that, with compassion and empathy and kind of with a sense of responsibility.
Yeah, it takes a lot of balls to approach.
Yeah, it does. I remember I asked my husband, because he asked me out in person, I was like, what was the indicator? Okay. And he said specifically, so like the moment before he asked me out, we were standing out in a parking lot. And it was cold, and I didn't have a sweater on. And we had been standing out in front of my car, like behind my car, for, 10 minutes at this point, and it was freezing. And I saw that he had a jacket on, and I stood outside, and I just, like, shivered, and then just, like, kept standing there and kept talking, and I was engaged. And he was like, in that moment, I know that, like, you would have rather been, like, in your warm car anywhere else, and yet you still stood there and talked to me, and you were smiling, and you made no indication that you wanted to leave this conversation. And within 30 seconds, he had asked me out.
There we go.
And I was like, absolutely. That is why I was like, I've been waiting. I was so cold. I've been waiting. But it really is. It can be as small as that. And the other thing that I've been talking about is the art of knowing where to go meet people.
Okay.
Because I think a lot of people are getting off of dating apps. They're getting off dating apps in throngs now. Bumble just did this whole rebrand.
Women are, or men are too?
Both. Okay. Because they're just fed up. Okay. There's already a disproportionate number of men versus women on dating apps. Where,
it's like 75-25 or something.
Yes. Yeah. And so I think a lot of people are fed up, understandably, because dating apps are gamified. They are designed to keep you on there. Hinge always I think their tagline is, it's the dating app designed to be deleted. That's fake. Yeah. That's BS. That's marketing BS. They want you on there because that pays the bills. So the algorithms are intentionally skewed so that you don't meet people that you're actually compatible with. They make it very difficult to filter people out and actually find people that you connect with. No wonder people are getting fed up, so they're leaving. But again, because of this issue of us not being trained in how to date and being taught and, seeing that in real life or having to go through the process, you don't really get trained. I mean, your parents can kind of talk you through things, but just having those experiences, again, if I were me and I were not married and I didn't have the mother that I did and all of my dating experiences were online, I definitely would be a total fish out of water in the dating scene. Because I had never done anything. I had never, again, been asked out. How do I even respond? How do I get a guy to ask me out? You just don't even know because, again, everything has been digital.
It's so interesting just how drastic a shift can be in 10 or 15 years.
Yeah. It's wild. So I think because of that, now that they're getting off dating apps, it's okay, we've put all that aside. We know that that's not healthy. We know that that's not working. So then where do we go? There's all of these series of people documenting it on social media. Day one of trying to find a boyfriend, not on social media and not on a dating app. They will they physically document themselves going to places and sitting at coffee shops and being do I see guys? But they're having to learn how to do this in their, 20s. And I keep saying organized activities. Go places repeatedly, I think is the best advice that I can give. Even if it's you go to the same neighborhood bar every single week at the same time, see who else is there, see who else, if there's a cute girl that lives in your neighborhood, or join a volleyball league or a soccer rec league where you are engaging with people and you are in the same group every single week. And I think for people who are not comfortable with dating and don't know how to do this, it just gets you comfortable with the opposite sex. You're engaging with women, you're engaging with men. Maybe you meet somebody there and you've already, created this rapport. He'll be more comfortable, you'll be more comfortable. That is a much easier playing field to ask somebody out. But I think the most important thing is literally just being comfortable being in an environment with the opposite sex without the express intent of dating. It's we don't even do that.
It's so wild. Gosh, when I was 18, dating apps didn't exist then. But if you'd used online dating, which did exist, there were online dating websites, you were a dork.
It's crazy how times have changed.
It's changed so much. Or if you had internet friends.
Yeah.
It was you're just sitting there on MSN Messenger
yeah, and now that's all of us. We all have internet friends.
That's been such an intriguing shift. I can very specifically remember if you heard that someone was on an online if it came out publicly that you were on an online dating website, if someone found your profile or something, you would have been ridiculed.
That's so wild. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that.
Yeah.
My first producer on Comment Section, he is, shout out Scheller, love you. I think he's in his early 40s, and he and his wife met on Tinder years ago.
Tinder's only 10 years old, isn't it?
Yeah, so the very beginning of Tinder.
Okay.
And it was when I asked him, I was where did you guys meet? It was on Tinder. But it wasn't even because of the reputation that Tinder now has. It was because it was online.
Okay.
And so that was interesting because in my mind I was oh, you met on that app. But with him, it was I met online. And so it's just so different seeing that.
Yeah. What's your thought? What are your thoughts on the, I don't know if, actually I do think this is happening in multiple countries. But in Gen Z, you're seeing that increasing split with women going more and more liberal and left and progressive, and men becoming more conservative and right-wing. Maybe number one, why do you think that's happening? And number two, I have some thoughts on this. What do you think that's going to lead to?
Oh, gosh. Well, to answer number two first, because that's easier, I think that it's going to just broaden the gender divide that already exists. I think it's going to create more distrust and vitriol between the sexes, which already exists, which is, I think, incredibly problematic and heartbreaking for society because we need good families. We need good relations between men and women. We literally are designed to be compatible. We need each other. I think that's difficult. But as to why it's happening, I ask myself that every day. One of my good friends is another great example of a wonderful example set for women. My friends run the magazine The Conservator. Okay. They are just brilliant, and they set such a great example for women. They have this amazing publication. And I love that exists. It's very new. Again, it's all of these things. I'm oh, if I was 15 now, I'd be so great. It'd be in such good hands. But one of their writers, she just called me one day, and she was Brett, why are they so liberal? We had this whole conversation. We were trying to break it down. And I think, number one, women are incredibly emotional. And the left does an incredibly good job at connecting to our emotions. And I think that is something that the right has failed miserably at.
For sure.
And I think that, I love Ben, obviously. I work with Ben, and, facts don't care about your feelings is very true because they don't.
It's also true in reverse.
Exactly. Yeah. Because somebody's feelings don't really care about your facts. That, for a lot of people, and very much so for women, will trump your facts. They genuinely will just not care.
Yeah. I've noticed.
Yes. And yeah. And so I think that is very difficult. And I think that the right is now just sort of catching on to that and understanding that that's kind of been a failure to not lean into that. I also think that they have not focused on women as an important demographic, kind of expecting that they would just follow when they really won't. I think that's a big one. I think in a very broad sense, and I almost worry about saying this, but I think it's true, I think that there is a severe lack of personal responsibility and accountability when it comes to women. Mm-hmm. And the biggest pressure point for me and the biggest indicator of that is the issue of abortion. Because so many women are one-issue voters now. Yes. Alex and I have friends who are more right-leaning. The husband in the relationship, wants to vote for Trump. It's totally fine. The wife would be on board, or the girlfriend would be on board to vote for Trump, is more right-leaning, but will not vote for him because of abortion, because she has been lied to, because she still thinks that he will enact some, federal abortion ban, even though time and time again he's saying that he won't, and they keep lying. He believes in exceptions. Nobody cares because they've been lied to for the last, 8 years. And because of that, they will not vote for him. And they're so bought into abortion. And for so many women, abortion is a lack of personal responsibility. I used to be pro-choice, and that is what changed my mind when I realized I care so much about personal responsibility. I care so much about accountability. My mom's parenting style when she was raising us is natural consequences. That was how she punished us. That is how our punishment was, decided upon. But we had to face natural consequences for everything. We had to learn how to take personal responsibility. And I care so much about that. And it drives so much of my life, being accountable not just for the world around me, but also for myself, my actions, my, responses to the world. It dictates everything. It determines how healthy I am, both of body and of mind. It's very important to me. And I realized by being pro-choice, I'm basically crossing all of that out and saying, no, actually, you don't have to take responsibility for this.
It's the ultimate escape clause.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because 98% of abortions are done for the sake of birth control.
Yeah, of course.
And so I saw that number, and my mind just completely shifted. And I had somebody respond to a tweet of mine last week and say, well, consent to sex isn't consent to pregnancy. And it's just, okay, so you can consent to having sex for the sole purpose of pleasure and not for the sole purpose of procreation. That does not remove the scientific, biological possibility that you will create a child. Mm-hmm. Just because you are saying it into the universe, just because you have the ability in many states to kill your child, to kill this fetus, that does not, you don't suddenly just get to evade all responsibility and evade the possibility of creating a life. No. And it just woke me up. And so I see that in so many women and how that dictates how they vote, the policies that they follow, is that they just want to avoid. They are willing to send our country further down the crapper because they want abortion, because they don't want to take personal responsibility. And so as a result, they're not taking any personal responsibility for our country going down the crapper. They're like, oh, no, I don't care. It's all about me. So it's very selfish, and it's devoid of personal responsibility. And I hate to say that.
It's true.
Yeah, and I've said that before. It applies to
effeminate men as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's a very harsh thing to say, but I think it's a real thing to say. I don't hate women at all. I love women. I think that women are wonderful, and I, value women's voices.
It's so interesting that, do you know what's so interesting? That you kind of felt that you had to add that caveat.
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm literally, exactly. And I genuinely feel like I have to. It's like, no, I don't hate, I'm not whatever.
I just think killing babies is wrong.
Yeah. It's sorry.
Yeah.
But I do. And I also think avoiding all personal responsibility and being willing to send our country into further turmoil to vote in a way that could, enact World War III. Sorry, but I think that's pretty distasteful, and I think that's pretty selfish. I think they're very selfish.
The psyop that has been run over the past 60 years across the entire West when it comes to the sexual revolution and it comes to birth control and abortion and the things that are bandied around as freedom and personal choice, essentially. I don't even know how you unwind
Yeah.
that one. This stuff started decades and decades before either of us were born.
It's
And
created
it's so pervasive.
a real false sense of entitlement.
Yeah, and I think
for women
people
everywhere.
also don't realize that, well, it's a sense of entitlement for men too. That's the funny side of it.
Yeah.
Right? The reason why a lot of men support abortion isn't, it's not as altruistic
Yep.
as they pretend it is.
No,
in
because
most
they are
cases.
also avoiding
Yeah,
responsibility.
they also want to have the escape clause. It's if a man is secular and wants to, engage in certain things and do certain things with women, it is in his best interest for that escape clause to exist, because there's also an interesting imbalance here, because everyone agrees, both left and right, they agree that if a man gets a woman pregnant and she has the child, then he should be morally and legally on the hook and financially on the hook to some degree. They'll literally say he has no say. Even the progressives will be like, nope. If he didn't want to have a baby, he shouldn't have hopped into bed. And it's like, interesting.
You're so close.
It's
so
like,
close.
okay. So
Yeah.
I'm like, I agree with you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
is there not a flip side to this equation?
Yeah.
It
It genuinely does not make
Yeah.
sense. It is so. I mean, it's just the most extreme form of brainwashing.
It is,
And
the
it's
thing
so-
is,
it's so sad to
if they
watch.
truly cared about equality, and I am absolutely not advocating this, but if they did want to balance it out, they would have to create a situation. They would be fighting for men to have the right to sign away their legal obligations in that regard. That is not what I want. I'm not trying to have a race to the bottom here.
But that is just if
would
you
be
want to be philosophically consistent with what you're arguing, that is what you're arguing for.
Yeah, that would
which
be the
is
thing that's
total
egalitarian.
chaos and destruction and totally morally wrong.
Yeah. What's interesting with all these things is so much of it is tied to the attack on the family. You could go deeper and say that this is all the attack on faith and attack on God ultimately. Yeah. I have a question. I mean, how do you think? What is it about you that enabled you to see through a lot of this veil early on, when most of your peers and most people around you were not and currently are not able to?
I feel like it's almost a cop-out answer, but it's the most important answer is my mother.
Okay.
And people who follow me know that I just revere her so much.
Tell me about your mother.
She's the most brilliant woman alive. I love her. She was very strict, but in a very intelligent and good way. She was strict in the way that she needed to be. But I think the most important thing is that she treated my brothers and I like equals 99% of the time. Obviously, there were times we needed to be punished and grounded when I, turned off my location tracking and snuck out of the house to do nothing. I know. I did it to go to In-N-Out with my friends. It was the most anticlimactic thing possible, and I missed curfew. I was such a good kid. That was the one time that I got grounded. But for the other 99% of the time, we were her equals. She always leveled with us. We had really lively debates and conversations. All of my brothers and I are very independent thinkers. My oldest brother, Chase, is just brilliant and can, argue around anybody. And he credits that also to my mom. I mean, we would all sit around the dinner table and we would have such interesting conversations. And she was so engaged in our education. I think that's a big thing, is that she was not the type of mother. She was a stay-at-home mom, but she was not the kind of stay-at-home mom that I think we see more of these days, where it's like the Pilates mom and they just drop their kids off at school and then they go and, they get their mimosas and they go to Pilates. And they are a stay-at-home mom, but it isn't what they're doing full-time. My mom, every waking moment, she was focusing on us and trying to make us good human beings. She knew that she had decided, she walked away from her career, and she said, my full-time job will be creating the best human beings that I can create. So she raised us all very differently. She raised us according to our Myers-Briggs personality types, basically.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
We all went to different schools. We had different, types of education based on what we needed. One of my brothers went to a military high school. He went to the Marine Military Academy.
What are the age differences between you guys?
12 and 14 years, so very drastic.
Oh,
and
wow.
there were a lot of changes between me and my brothers and my mom had changed her mind about a lot of things, that how she raised them, especially in the earlier stages of our lives. Like, I was not put in preschool. My brothers were. I think that might be the thing that she regrets more than anything, of, watching my brothers wail and cry going to preschool, just thinking that's, like, she was a stay-at-home mom, and she always says, like, why did I do that? But she was lied to and said, that's what you have to do. Go put your kids in school, get them into the institution, get them, so that they will fall in line and know how to respect teachers. And she looks at that now and goes, like, there was no reason for me to be putting my, 3 and 4-year-olds in school and watching them cry. Like, she told me the other day, it was just heartbreaking, that she would take my brothers to school, like, leading up to preschool, and they would train for the 2 weeks prior to preschool. And they would practice getting out of the car and going up and, like, okay, then this is when mom will leave. Yeah. Because she was just like, I couldn't listen to them cry. And I never went to preschool. One of my brothers, did better in public school. One of my other brothers, after public school, he decided that he wanted to go to a different type of private school. He tried. My brother David, who passed away when he was 17, we wanted to try the Marine Academy like our older brother, and it didn't work. And so there was no harm, no foul. It was no, like, well, we sent you there. She went, okay, let's figure out what does work. They homeschooled for a bit and did Stanford's online school, which had just come out at the time. And that really didn't work well for my brothers, but homeschooling really worked well for me. So I was homeschooled all throughout my, lower education career, whatever you'd call it, K through 12, except for 1 year. When my freshman year of high school, I said, I think I'm missing out and I want to try public school. And my mom did not think it was a good idea. She didn't want me in public school, but she said, okay, like, lay out your reason. So I'd give a PowerPoint presentation of why this is how people are going to laugh at me. I was such a nerd. Laid out why I felt like I should go to public school, what I was missing, what I would get socially. I was going to go to a performing arts school. I could have dance classes. I could be in musicals, all of that. She said, okay. And we literally moved to this school district so I could go to this particular performing arts magnet school. I went there for a year. She was right. I hated it. Like, within the first semester, I was like, I never want to go back. I hated who I became at that school.
What do you mean by that?
I was more pessimistic, lazy, and angry than I've ever been in my life. I was surrounded by people who, I shouldn't say by people. I was in an environment where we were talked at for 6 hours a day. I felt so behind. I felt so unintellectually stimulated. I was around a bunch of kids whose parents were not like mine, that did not hold them to the same standards that I was held, who were, had really bad behavior that I did not want to associate with, who were incredibly bratty. This also will sound bad, but I felt smarter than a lot of them, and that really confused me because I was younger than them, because I think I started high school when I was 12 turning 13. And that was very confusing to me. And I was like, you've been in this school. We're in the same grade, and you can't even sit still. You can't even pay attention. I also felt like I was wasting so much time, because when you're homeschooling, I would get all my school done in the first 2 hours of the morning, and then I would go to dance classes. I would go to gymnastics. My mom and I would cook in the kitchen for hours at a time, or I would go sit outside in my tree house and read. I would be reading Jane Austen at like 10 years old. And my life was so full, and then suddenly I was in this brick box for 8 hours a day, because I was in magnet school, so I would stay later for rehearsals and dance classes, and I hated it. But I think the thing that stood out to me was, and I remember telling her this, which looking back feels pretty insightful for being 13, but I just said, I don't like who I've become. I don't think I'm as smart. I don't think I'm as kind. I think that I would snap at her a lot more than I did. I think that I watched my peers and the way that they treated their parents and the lack of respect. I think that rubbed off on me. And so I'm so glad that I left. But all that to say, she was very engaged, and she was willing to take a risk when we presented it in a thoughtful way. And again, always leveled with us when I had questions about politics or what I was seeing, or, why is my friend, having sex when she's 13 years old? And, we had very difficult conversations. And she never said, she never told me what to think. And she never told me that I shouldn't be thinking about something, like, you're too young to understand this, or, just say, think what I do and we'll move on. She always took the time, would put away what she was doing and sit down, and we would work through things. And it gave me the critical thinking tools that I think a lot of young people did not get, because I didn't learn any of that in public school. I don't think there was a lick of critical thinking that was taught in that 1 year that I was in public school. It was literally just, here's the book that you're reading, this is how you should think about it, here is, this piece of history that you're reading, We don't even have a discussion about it. Just take your test, move on. The same thing happened in college. My first semester at UCLA, I took a literature class. It was race, gender, sexuality, and culture or something in Asian American literature. And at UCLA, you have to do, it's changed now and there's more requirements in this regard, but you had to take one intersectionality course. I think I was the last year where you only had to do one. Now the majority of the credits in order to be an English major are intersectional classes. So I was like, I'm just going to get out of the way. I'm going to check this box. But I went into it with an open mind. It's like I've never really...
That's so wild to me that you have to do that.
Mm-hmm. Because you would think that if you were an English major, you would be reading Milton, you would be reading Shakespeare, you would be reading Jane Eyre, you would be reading things like Beowulf. Those aren't required anymore. I remember, University of Michigan has one of the best English literature programs in the country. A couple of years ago, they wiped those as requirements. But now the requirements are intersectionality. So like reading American literature in the 1700s through the lens of feminism.
Oh, gosh.
So it's like that. But in this class, I submitted my final paper. I had my thesis approved by her in front of the class, wrote my paper. I got the worst grade I've ever received on a paper, and I'm a good writer, and I was an English major, so I know how to write an essay. And the primary complaint that she had was that she did not agree with my thesis and that it was not correct. Mm. So even at the university level, in a literature class, which is supposed to be subjective, writing a subjective paper talking about my analysis of this book that we were reading, this novel, I got a poor grade because what I argued was, in her mind, incorrect.
Yes.
I was not rewarded for thinking differently than other people and laying out that argument well. Mm-hmm. There was no pushback. It was simply just, that's incorrect.
I disagree with you.
Yeah. And I think that we have that starting as young as elementary school now in the general education system. And so children aren't taught how to think. And I think if they were, and if their parents had these conversations with them and actually had them engage in culture and engage in values and politics and engage in philosophy and teach them those things at a young age, I'm not saying that they would all like pop out being like perfect little conservative kids, because I don't really care. I care more about you raising good, thoughtful, empowered children that are willing to ask questions and are willing to push boundaries and not just follow groupthink and follow what their peers think. There's often people who will say, I don't want to homeschool my kids. I want them to go to public school so that they can be normal. It's like, look around you. Like the kids that are normal now are sleeping around, doing drugs. They're confused about their gender. They're wanting to chop their boobs off. They're idolizing.
This is the bifurcation I'm talking about.
Yep, exactly. And it's like, you want that? You're so afraid of them being the weird homeschool students that you would rather risk your children because you're so afraid of what you have. It's
the same reason they give them smartphones.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't want them to be left out.
I don't want them to be left out, yeah.
It's weak parenting.
Yeah, it's interesting. The sicker a society and a culture get, I've made this point before, then the more dangerous it is to be normal.
Yeah.
So if normal means obese and in debt and depressed and on permanent medications and not knowing how to interact with people and not having the attention span to read a book and being addicted to smartphones and social media, it's like, well, you don't want to be normal.
Yeah.
Like it used to be safe to be normal. Mm-hmm. Normal used to mean, if you go back a few decades ago, and I'm not trying to sort of view history through this perfect rose-tinted lens, but normal used to be like, okay, normal, healthy, spiritually sound, mentally sound,
sociable, friendly,
sociable, marriageable.
Yep.
And now normal is like, you don't want to be normal.
No.
Like you have to go against the grain in multiple regards.
And it's wild because now going against the grain, when you're rebelling in our modern age, you are rebelling by doing things that are actually very traditional.
Yes.
Homeschooling is actually very traditional. Mm-hmm. The public school system is very new in the grand scheme of our history. Yeah. For the majority of history, children were schooled at home or through governesses.
It's designed to make factory workers.
It was, yes. It is literally designed after the prison system for good reason because, again, you just fall into line. That's why people want their kids in preschool ASAP, get them in line.
Mm-hmm. They even use the same buses in this country, don't they?
Yes, they do, literally. You see, inmates being bussed off to jail, and then you see, a yellow version of that same bus. Yeah. But homeschooling is now deemed weird. Even now, and I think more people than ever are homeschooling, and they're getting more comfortable with the idea. I still have people that will say, I could never do that. Or they'll say, I'm just shocked you turned out so well because you were homeschooled. It's like, okay, well, these days things have changed.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are ways that you can turn out as a very weird, unsocialized homeschooler. But that's not a product of homeschooling itself. That is a product of the parents and their choices. If you never let your kid leave the house, obviously they're going to be unsocialized. Same goes for public school. There are a lot of public school kids that are very unsocialized. Take a look at the majority of our Gen Z voters. Like, that's them. So homeschooling is something that is very traditional, but is now an act of rebellion. Getting married young and having kids is very traditional, but now is like a crazy thing to do. I know. I mean, even in like the right-wing space, when I was like, I got engaged, I'm getting married.
People will still give you...
Yes.
Yeah.
They will. It's like, really? Are you sure? Yeah. You see it online all the time. If a young woman gets engaged before the age of 25, it's like, oh, that's a tough one. That's really risky. And that is normal.
Do you know what's crazy? I'm just thinking about this. It's crazy that we live in a society where having sex at 15, 16, 17, even 18 is normal. But getting married at 18, 19, 20, 21, maybe even 22 is considered like,
or waiting for marriage.
Are you sure about that? Yeah. Like it's such an inversion, and it's intriguing because this only took place in the last few decades. It only took it's such a it's such a recent thing. And it's just, I don't know, I'm just amazed by like the speed.
It's the women's lib movement.
I'm amazed.
I blame them for basically everything, as they should be.
When I talk to my parents have been married for 48 years.
That's amazing.
It shouldn't be. It should be.
I know. I say that as like a product of divorce. But I'm like, that's amazing.
It's supposed to be the norm. Exactly. But shout out to them. I love my parents. But like, my mom was 22. I think my mom was 22. I think my dad was 31. And at 22, so this is in Nigeria. Okay. And at 22, people were worried that she'd never get married.
That's crazy.
Because if you graduated college and you weren't yet married as a woman, most women graduated married. Yeah. And so at 22, people were like, ooh, that's... She's leaving this a bit late kind of thing, right? And so
and that isn't just in Nigeria. I mean, there's like a tiny little like trace of it left, I think, in the South here in America. There's the whole like, you go to college and get your MRS degree and you have ring by spring is what they say. Yeah.
Is that what they say, ring by spring?
Yes, you get your MRS degree. And you ring by spring and all of that. But it's a very, very small portion of our population. And those things are kind of more thrown around now as jokes. But that used to be the norm. Like, that is why you would go to college. And obviously, like, my mom talks about that all the time. She was born in 1960. And her mom even, looked at her going to college as a place to find a man. Yeah. And I mean, she did meet my dad in college, so there you go. But that was the sole purpose. And she was glad that my mom got educated, but that was, while you were there, that's what you were supposed to be doing. And it was not weird. It wasn't absurd. But now these days, like, I look at my peers at UCLA, a vast majority of them didn't date throughout college, like didn't date seriously. They would hook up, they would go on dates, they would go to parties. Very few people had serious relationships, and if you did, that was weird. And it was like you were kind of the odd one out. It's like, oh yeah, well, she's been with her boyfriend since high school. And I was like, oh wow, that's like so amazing. And then you would see girls that were on like their third abortion, and that was the normal thing. Sheesh. Yeah. It's such an
inversion, these conversations are really interesting to me because I've had such a mixed background. So I'm sort of Western, but sort of not. So I was born in England and I'm British, but my family is Nigerian. And I grew up in Saudi Arabia. And I now live in the Middle East again, in Dubai, and I've traveled to all these countries. So I can really see, I sort of cherry pick from different nations, country, cultures, ways of doing things, and I can very clearly see the things that make total sense and are having positive effects in certain societies and cultures and nations, and then you can also clearly see the negatives. You can kind of just compare and contrast. So if I look at the countries I guess I know best, the UK, USA, Saudi Arabia, Nigeria. Maybe I could even throw the UAE in there now. Like, these are very different nations in different ways, and there are certain things that are done much better in each of them than in the others, and certain things that are a lot worse. Even between the UK and US, which people think are I think people think those two countries are more similar than they are because we all speak English. And obviously the U.S. There's a historical connection there, right? But there are some really core differences, and there are certain cultural aspects and attitudes, for example, that exist in the U.S. There's some that I love and I admire, and I think other countries could learn from and aspire towards. And there's some that I think are completely backwards and toxic, and I'm just like, what is wrong with Americans? Like, why do you even have that mindset? Like, to give a good one is like this, and I know not every family does this, but this whole thing of like kicking your kids out at 18, or like making your young adult children like pay rent to stay in your house, like that type of stuff, or another one, or on the other end, the idea of like not looking after your elderly parents, or just like
the complete lack of community
in Nigeria, or even in like Saudi Arabia in the Middle East. That is like a complete that's unthinkable. It's unthinkable, and I see this in the UK as well, right? People are constantly complaining that the government is not doing enough for elderly people. And my brain is like, most of them have kids. Like, why are you letting your 80-year-old dad or mom just like live in squalor? Like, and sometimes people won't even go visit. It's like you've got an elderly parent, and you live 2 hours away.
And that just goes back to this whole, destruction of the family and what we value. And again, goes back to a lack of respect and gratitude for what they've given us. But I've had to catch myself on this a bit because I think it's a double-edged sword, speaking about like kicking your kids out. Because I do think at a certain point, parents need to take account of their children and go, okay, so my kid needs a kick in the rear. And, they're mooching off of me. They're doing nothing. And I think in those circumstances, it's like, the kid needs to move out and get a job and figure it out. But those are kind of the exceptions. And I think at certain times I've made that the rule. Like, don't move back home. Don't do this because you need to be going out and, making, a name for yourself. And I think that a lot of that comes from, my own biases, because I have a couple of friends that I grew up with that had no independence and had no desire for it because their parents never encouraged it. Like, girls that I grew up with who at 19 years old didn't have a driver's license, and their mom would still drive them around. Lived at home, they were actors, and they would get a job at a coffee shop and go, literally would work 3-hour shifts on a Saturday, go, it was just way too much, I just couldn't do it, and would quit. And so they're living on Social Security in between acting jobs, living with their parents, do not have a car, and do not have a driver's license. And at that moment, I'm like, okay, the parent needs to take some responsibility because obviously you have not...
Isn't that kind of trad, though? It's like that's what women do for most of history.
But they don't have a man, but they hate men. That's the thing. If they were looking for a husband, that would be one thing. But these are like, this one that I'm thinking of right now, this individual person, that was the 13-year-old sleeping around. She had no desire to have any kind of boyfriend. Her parents had been divorced for a really long time. She was the one who, I remember we were on a walk one time, and we were talking about having kids, and she was like, I don't want kids, or whatever. And I remember saying to her, that is the most important thing to me. I want to get married. I want to have kids. Like, I will walk away from this industry if it means I'm able to be an active mother. She looked at me and she was like, you're willing to give everything up for a child. I'm like, yes, I am. So it's this whole mindset.
So one of the things that has made the USA such a successful and prosperous country over the centuries is the individualism, individual rights, entrepreneurial spirit and attitude and ability to just, go out there and believe in yourself and pursue whatever you want. That is awesome. And I like that people have that mentality. But like with pretty much everything, it can overcorrect.
Yes.
There can be an excess, and there's a level of individualism
Very
where
harmful.
It becomes pathological. Right? We're at the point where people think, I'm so special and I'm so different. I'm going to invent my own gender. I'm inventing my own pronouns. I'm completely annihilated. Why do you think loneliness rates are so high and people are anxious and depressed? And it's like, we're all part of something. As independent as I am, as independent as you are, we are part of not just one thing. We're part of multiple things. We're part of
that's why the LGBTQ community has, I think, skyrocketed in popularity because they offer a sense of community that a lot of people don't have. They're not of faith. They're not going to church. They are disconnected from their families. The family unit has been destroyed. A lot of them resent and hate their parents.
That's wild.
And so they find community here. It's like, oh, we love you. We're tolerant. We're accepting. Come be with us. Be bisexual. You actually might be gay. You might be trans. Come with us. We have rainbows and we have big parades, and it's the best. So they like joined this community. And the other thing with, parent and child relationships, again, so many of these, I think the one thing that does irritate me about the whole, children moving back home, I don't even know if irritating is the right word, but so many of these young people are making demands of their parents, like, I need you to, can I move back home because the economy is so bad, I need to get on my feet. But they haven't spoken to their parents in years, and they hate their parents because their parents have different values.
That's a thing?
Yeah.
Oh, that's not good.
Yes, where they resent their parents because their values are too old-fashioned. They don't understand that I'm whatever I'm identifying as. So it's a whole mess. And so in a perfect situation, I don't even know if perfect, I would just say in a good situation, I do think that parents should open up their homes to their adult children. And it's like, if you, especially in this economy, when you're saving up to buy a home, if you're working.
As long as you're doing something productive, whether that's
you're
educating, you've got some type of job, you're starting a business, you're an entrepreneur, like what,
and
whatever
I think it's wonderful to still be with your parents and have that presence in your life.
I love being with my parents. And I went to boarding school at 11.
Mm-hmm. Wow, really?
Yeah, so I've been traveling by myself internationally since I was 11. And I spent from 11 to 20, I was away from my parents and my family.
How did that impact you going into adulthood?
Well, it meant that by the time I got to university, I'd already been away from my family for 7 years. Mm-hmm. So I remember going to university and seeing people like crying because they were homesick and stuff, and I was like,
"You're like, not me."
I was like, "This is totally new to you." I was actually way more independent. Like, I knew how to cook, I knew how to like do laundry, and like I just realized that there were all these 18, 19-year-olds, and they didn't kind of know how to do basic things, and they weren't as emotionally developed. And I was already used to being thrust into new environments, having to make new friends.
That's great.
Because for 7 years I went to an all-boys school for 2 years and then a mixed school for 5 years. The mixed school was also interesting, partly because it was 3 boys to 1 girl.
Wow, okay.
So, you had to have some game, right?
Yeah. Stiff competition.
So it was, you learned a lot of things, but I played a lot of sports. Like I was a rugby player, and I did a ton of sports, rugby, football, rowing, like a whole bunch of stuff. But I don't think boarding school is for everyone.
Yeah.
And it might not even be for most people. Mm-hmm. But I think that for children of a certain level of maturity and a certain personality type, I think it works really well. And we saw that. There were some kids who were just there for 1 term.
Yep.
They couldn't hack it,
It's interesting. So I kind of talked about my mom and the different ways that she educated us. So I had my oldest brother, Chase, and this is what's so crazy and kind of a mind trip to think about. He's 14 years older than me. He went to the Marine Military Academy in Texas at 15 when I was 1. So for my entire childhood, he was not around. So he would spend his summers, because he knew that he wanted to be in the service. He would spend his summers at intensives. He got his pilot's license, I think it's 16 in Washington at the time. You could get it at 16. He spent his summers training, going to West Point and doing their summer intensives, going to the Naval Academy, doing all of that. He was never home. My brother Reed and his twin David, who's the one who passed away, they were at home with me for a lot longer. They were in public school for a longer period of time, and then we moved to Tennessee, and they went to an all-boys private school, and they were boarders, because it was a school where you could either be a day student or a boarder. And where my brother Chase thrived in the boarding school environment. He was hyper-independent. He and my mom just would butt heads 24/7. They're both super high-strung, and it was just like they would go at it. It was really good for him. And the discipline and the structure that he got at the Marine School was so needed. Mm-hmm. He loved it. For my other brothers, it was not for them. And my mom she talks about it in retrospect. And she often says, like, I wish that I had pushed back on them a little more, because my brother David passed at 17. Reed, his surviving twin, it was obviously really hard on him. Mm-hmm. And she did not, because she was so worried about negatively impacting him because he was in such a vulnerable state after David's death. She often says that she feels like she just kind of let things go and didn't have such a heavy hand on parenting him in those last couple of years of high school, and kind of let this boarding school just do what they would, basically, even though she knew that he was not the kind of student for boarding school. Reed is he's highly intelligent. He's very, very sweet, but I think out of all of us, he was more easily swayed by his peers, and so probably was not the best person to be at a boarding school and be away from my family, especially in such a vulnerable state. And I think that's, he's a diagnosed schizophrenic now, and he lives permanently in a psychiatric facility. And that's when he started doing drugs. And there was nobody there to stop him or to redirect him. And the school knew and enabled it in a lot of ways. And the parents weren't informed. They turned a blind eye because the kids distributing the drugs were, I believe, a son of one of the administrators and like high donors, and were also like top of their class, dean's list students. They just tried to shut up. So they didn't even tell the parents of the kids that were buying and using. And so I think it's interesting that you said that you can see that, that break, because again, with my brother Chase, it was amazing for him.
Yep.
And for Reed, my mom, I know that she just wishes she had pulled him out sooner.
Yeah.
And with me, I desperately wanted to go to boarding school because my brothers did, because I wanted to do everything that they did. And she was, pushed back against it. She let me go to public school for 1 year, but my family was really tumultuous. I had, just had a brother die. My father struggles with a lot of mental illness, and that impacted my childhood in a lot of very, very difficult ways. They were really not the best fit for each other, my parents, and so they had been, they had a very, very lengthy, drawn-out divorce.
How old were you when they split?
I was 15 when they split, but it had been going on for a long time. They were separated and very disconnected, probably from the time that I was 10 or 11.
Okay.
Actually, I don't think that they finalized it until I was 17, actually. The legal battle was taking place at 15. That's why I emancipated myself, because I wanted nothing to do with it. Did not want to be in a custody battle. I was already making money as an actor, had literally was working 40 hours a week at Trader Joe's while being in school and while acting and taking on acting jobs. And I was just like, I do not want to be in your fight. I don't want to be in the war zone. I don't want to deal with the custody battle. I can literally afford to have this apartment by myself and go live with somebody. I just do not want to continue being in this mess. So because of that, and because of everything going on, she knew, she was like, I'm just not going to send this child away, even though it kind of seems backwards. You might want to get your kid out of that situation. But looking back, we've talked about it. She said, you were so vulnerable. You were so vulnerable. There was so much going on that you didn't understand, and that you were trying to break down and understand in real time. And that's when you needed your mom. That's when you needed your parents.
Yes.
And I'm so grateful that she thought about that and was so concerned with that. So anyway, I just think that's interesting. My mom also moved us around a lot, and that was very intentional. For what you said about being able to land on your feet and make new friends and adapt and be resilient. I think there's a lot of ways to do that when you're raising a child, but I don't think people do it enough. And I understand wanting to give your kids stability and, stay in the same house forever and let them, go K through 12 with the same group of friends. And there are times in my life when I think, that would have been nice to have one stagnant group of friends. But I don't think I would.
Like 5 or 6.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that it's also better to move around a lot. And like you said, to learn how to be resilient. All right, I'm in a new city at a new school. What do? We're now moving from Washington State to Tennessee. Now I'm going to New York to do acting. Now I'm moving to LA. LA was like a fever dream in many ways, because I was in this acting community. And you would have friends, and then they would just jet set off to, Vancouver to shoot the new show Riverdale, and they'd be gone for 6 months. And be like, okay, well, my best friend just left now. What do I do? I have to make new friends. It was just constantly, all right, adapting, redirecting. My mom always said that she wanted to be like, the little toy Gumby, the little green man who snaps back. She was like, that's how I want you guys to be. So I think there's a lot of ways for parents to encourage that in their children, and I see how boarding school could be that for people. But it really comes down to, is it a good fit for your child?
Yeah, it's interesting, because where I grew up, everyone went to boarding school.
Interesting.
The only thing is I went early.
Yeah.
Most people went after 9th grade. So in Saudi Arabia, where I lived, after 9th grade, the school only went up to 9th grade.
Wow.
Right.
Then you had to go.
So what is it, 10th till 12th? So all the American kids would go to boarding schools in America. All the Canadian kids would go in Canada. British kids would go to the UK. But because there's quite a difference between the American and British school systems, in our family, we left after 5th grade. So I'm the last of 5 kids.
Okay.
So all my older siblings had, gone off to boarding school. And then after that, university, I was the last one. So yeah, for me, it was I get asked a lot of questions about it, but for us, it was just normal.
Yeah.
It was the normal thing to do. I sometimes forget that most people didn't have that experience. So I want to talk about, when did you get married? You got married recently?
Yes, I got married in March of this year. Thank you.
Yes. So how's it been?
It's amazing. It's the best thing I've ever done.
Wow.
I love him so much.
I met him, by the way. Nice guy.
He's great. He loved you. This morning he was like, "Is today Zuby?" And I said, "Yeah." And he was like, "He's the best." So he was really excited I was coming. He was like, "He's just such a cool dude." Nice. I was thinking about this earlier, actually, because I was complimenting him about something. But, modern women, when they talk about committing to a guy and, settling down and getting married, they often look at it as a negative because you're holding yourself back from other opportunities and you're settling down. Like, even that word has kind of like a negative connotation. They're going to hold you back. They're going to hold you down. Mm-hmm. Since being with Alex, I have never felt more empowered, more sure of myself, more confident, more free, more comfortable. I mean, it's like all the good things in my life were heightened by his presence. He is the one that has encouraged me to take huge swings in my career. He is the one, we shot Pendragon in Budapest last year. And I was really excited to get back into acting, and I thought that'd be really fun. But it meant leaving for 5 months and moving abroad. It was terrifying to me. I was like, I don't really know. I get really comfortable in situations, which I think is, a nice thing. But taking risks is a habit, and it's a skill, and I think we get very comfortable in the mundane and insecurity, and so it's good to throw yourself out there sometimes. And he's very good at knowing when I need to do that. And he basically looked at me and said, "You're not going to stay here. You're going to go and do this, and we're going to figure it out." And, he was working a remote job. He works for himself, and he said, "I'll be there for as much as I can be, and I will travel, and we will make this work, because there's no reason that you're going to say no to something because you're afraid of being away from me or because you feel too comfortable and like it's scary." So you have this person that is just with you 24/7, who knows you better than anybody else, who hopefully knows what is good for you and knows what you need. Yeah. And it really is like a mirror that, holds you to this really high standard, and it's amazing. I always said that I wanted, and actually my producer Reagan is sitting right here, and she said this at our rehearsal dinner, and she gave a speech at our rehearsal dinner. She's my producer, but she's also my best friend. But she said, Brett has always talked about wanting an intellectual sparring partner. That was always the phrase that I used. I used it so much that she even knew it. People on my show knew it. But I'm a pretty dominant personality. I talk for a living. Mm-hmm. I can talk for hours on end. I'm very confident. I have a lot of energy. And in relationships and in dating and even in friendships, that often manifested in steamrolling people. Mm-hmm. And I would kind of attract myself to doormats. And then I would, because I would think, okay, well, nobody is going to kind of dominate me because this is just my personality. So this is just what it's going to be. And every time I, left those situations feeling unfulfilled because nobody would stand up to me, nobody would push back, nobody would argue with me. And I kind of laugh about it now that I'm kind of about to say this out loud. But it was like, why is my mother debating me more than any of these guys are that I'm going out with? Like, I was looking for that kind of relationship of, like, again, sitting down at the dinner table and, like, duking things out. Like, I was not meeting anybody. I wasn't meeting anybody that was challenging me. And I met Alex, and he is so... I've never met anybody that is so sure of himself and his values and his principles and is so undeterred. That doesn't mean that he's, like, stuck in his ways and won't adapt, but who is so confident in what he believes and is willing to fight for it. He has made me more thoughtful. He's made me more conservative in a lot of ways by pushing me to challenge the way that I
good man will.
think. Yeah, exactly. It will. That's why, we can have hope for women, because if they meet a good man, they'll bring him over a little bit with some common sense. But he was exactly what I needed. He stands up to me when I need to be stood up to. He holds me accountable when I don't want to hold myself accountable. In a very loving way, and I think that it's, I do the same for him, and it's an amazing balance, and it's this dance, and it's so obvious that that's how it's supposed to be, that we are, compatible, we're designed to act in this way, but I genuinely believe that I'm better in every way because of him, and obviously our marriage is still very new, but I'm so grateful, genuinely. I think the best thing I can say is every good thing in my life has been heightened because of him.
It's beautiful to hear that.
I love it.
It's genuinely good to hear that. I mean, we're at such a strange time in society and culture.
Yeah.
Like we come back to this topic. One thing I find so bizarre, even though I do understand it better than most people do, but
we can understand things and also still acknowledge that they're crazy.
Yeah, it's fascinating how there are millions of women out there who are asking the question, where have all the good men gone, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And there's millions of men out there asking, where are all the good women?
Yeah.
And when I talk to women, they'll all be like, oh, I know so many like single women out there and who are great and they're beautiful and da-da, and they can't find a man. And men are like saying the same thing. So it's like, how mathematically this should be quite simple to work out. Why don't you take these millions of supposedly good women and millions of supposedly good men and kind of bring them together, and surely sort of, problem solved. But what do you think is causing this disconnect, this mismatch that's leading to these, I don't know. I had an interesting conversation with my older sister about it as well, because she's an investment banker.
Okay.
And has been for 20 plus years, like very super successful, married with 2 kids. She's in her early 40s, and she knows so many women who are, within 5 years of her age range, who are, professional, successful. They really took that route of going, and they're single and lonely and struggling to find a man. Well, not even struggling to find a man, struggling to find a man who
they want.
That they want and that they're attracted to, and
I think
it's kind of wild. Yeah,
I think a lot of this, and even more heightened in that situation, is very mismatched expectations.
Yes,
I think that when you, I don't want to say wait, but when you have not been in a relationship for many years, as I see women get older and they progress in their careers, obviously your desires, your expectations, your standards will probably increase as your salary increases, as your profession, as your, the way that you live, your lifestyle increases, you will have more and more demands.
Yep.
And women statistically are outpacing men right now. They're out earning them. They are out educating men in a lot of ways, especially here in America. Women on a whole are mentally healthier than men, just in terms of the suicide statistics.
Not depression, though.
Well, I mean, they're very depressed. But
women attempt suicide more, I think, but men are more successful at it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's interesting.
Men are more likely to use lethal force that actually kills themselves. If you look at suicide attempts, I believe it's higher.
Interesting. Well, that makes sense, because women are basically just
men are more likely to straight up like take a gun and just like not take a bunch of pills.
And try. But I think that as women, keep progressing, and meanwhile they're screaming about equality and like, we're so oppressed. It's like, really, you're not. Again, you're outpacing men. So I think there's a disconnect there where you reach a certain age and a certain point in your career, and you're looking around and you don't see, there's there's slim pickings of guys that are going to, meet these standards, because you've girl bossed too close to the sun, as they always say. Yeah, exactly. It's not. No. So I think that's why it's so dangerous to tell women, just wait to get married, wait to find somebody. And my mom used to be one of those people, and she changed her tune. She often said, literally told me, don't date until you're 30. Don't even think about it. Get your life in order.
Idea.
I know. Diane. Yeah, she's changed her mind about that. She really changed her tune. But what she was meaning when she said that was, you should know yourself well before you marry somebody.
Yes.
And that, I think, is still very good advice. I don't think that you should get married if you are not sure about the person's values who you're marrying, if you're not even certain about your own values and what you want, what you believe. And obviously there are circumstances where people's mind changes, and that's totally fine, and you develop together, which is a beautiful thing. But you should still know yourself and be confident in yourself. And I remember I was moving off to Nashville, and she was like, okay, so I've changed my mind. And she was like, actually, I don't think that was the best advice. And she said, you do know yourself, and you are, 20 years old, and you already have a very, thriving career, and this is a very different world than it was 10 years ago. And she even acknowledged, she was like, a lot of the good guys are getting picked up quickly. Oh, yeah. And she also said, this is a very volatile and unstable society, and I want you to have a partner.
Yes.
And I want you to have somebody that you can weather this storm with. And if there is, global turmoil, I don't want you to be alone, and you should be thinking. So those were very real concerns. And so she completely changed her tune, and I'm so grateful that she said that to me so directly, because then I moved to Nashville. I started looking and knew exactly what I was looking for. But And it wasn't like my standards were lower when I was dating because I was younger, but I was looking for somebody to grow with. I was looking for a match.
Yes.
Alex is many years older than me. He's 7 years older than me. And I've had, people have turned some heads about that, but...
That's the most normal thing in the world.
Yeah, exactly. And also when you
I think 7 years is about, at least globally, that's about the
Yeah.
average.
And when you said that about your parents, I was like, oh, that's funny. That makes sense. But in the States, that's kind of weird now. But I was young and I had already graduated.
That's part of the problem, by the way. And I've given this advice to young women. I'm like,
Yes.
I'm like, date older men.
Yes.
Date older men.
Because
and I
the
say this from
maturity
a man,
levels are
'cause, like,
so, are very, women, mature faster than men. And
also, as a guy, it takes time to, like, men and women are not attracted to the same things.
Yes.
So much of this
Yeah.
boils down to this psyop that men and women are identical.
Yeah. No,
and that
that's
we
what
have
I mean.
the
It's all
same-
mismatched. The expectations
Yeah.
are mismatched. What we want is mismatched.
For a guy to, if you're super, super, super religious, then, the whole getting married at 21 to high school, it's weird, like
Yep.
that kind of works. But for most men, you want to at least feel like you can protect and provide on a basic level.
Yep.
Before you feel like you're ready to get married.
Yep.
And for most men, that's not going to be at 22. It
Yep.
might be like, 27, 30, or 30 plus for sure.
And as a woman, I was looking for the same thing because I had a full career. I was living by myself.
Yeah.
Had already graduated college at, 20 years old. The normal thing for me to do would have been to go over to Vanderbilt and date a Vanderbilt college student. But that would be a totally mismatched.
No, it's
completely
mismatched.
It is. And it's so, where we were in our lives, we're totally mismatched what we valued, what we wanted in the very near future. And I was looking for somebody who was very sure of themselves and could provide and could
time.
protect. Yeah. And so I was looking for somebody, who could do that, but also was at a point where we could grow together.
Yeah.
I wanted to build a life together. I think you get to a point, and I think that this is really gets back to the crux of, your sister and her friends, of like at 40 years old, you have a very established life.
Yes.
You're not going to build a life with somebody. You're going to have to figure out how to fit somebody into your life.
Yeah.
You already probably own a home. You have a lifestyle that you want and that you want to keep. You have goals and expectations. You are very set in your ways as a single individual. At a younger age, Alex at, 28 and me now, we're 21 when we got together.
Yep.
We were both at a point where we were still malleable. And, we were able to build this life together and wanted to, and were able to bend and compromise in ways because it really wasn't a big deal. It didn't matter. But I think the entitlement grows as you get older, and the wanting to be set in your ways becomes more of a factor as you get older, so it becomes really complicated, I think, for both men and women. And so then, once again, it's like this whole disconnect of nobody's willing to bend and give, and it's because of a lie, especially that we've told women.
It's a lot of lies, man.
Yeah, all of it. Of like,
many
girl
lies.
boss, don't care about men. Men are actually the worst. They're going to ruin your life, so wait and get all your stuff together. Freeze your eggs. It'll be totally fine, and then go find somebody because they'll all be there. Newsflash, they're not.
But didn't you know such and such actress just had a baby at 52?
Yeah. It's like, how do you think she did that?
That's not like the norm, is it?
No.
What do you think is the greatest fear women have in this regard when it comes to dating, mating, marriage? What do you think is the greatest fear amongst women?
I think there's two versions of this answer. I think that women would say, I think the answer that would be most politically correct in this current climate is that they would not do enough before they get married, that they don't achieve enough. That's what I hear from a lot of friends, what I see online, is that like, I'm scared that I don't want to have a baby before I do this. Like, I need to achieve all of these things before I settle down and have a committed relationship. I'm afraid that I'm going to miss out.
Okay.
I think if you asked women on a deeper level and you pushed them harder, because it is biological, I do think that there is a fear of, our biological clock.
Okay.
I think there's a fear of not being loved, not being accepted, not being desirable by men, because that's really, at the end of the day, we're all primal creatures.
Yes.
That's what we want. We want to procreate, whether or not you lean into that or not, or whether you go in a different direction, which, is totally fine. That's your prerogative. But I think just from a primal guttural level, I do think that most women have that fear, and we have just been told to suppress it, and that that's actually a bad thing. So yeah, the majority of what I hear just on a surface level is, I'm going to miss out. I want to travel the world. I want to do this. I need to have my career fully in place. I need to own a home.
Do you know
That's the weirdest, owning a home before you get, I need to do that. I'm like, okay, then what do you do when you meet? It's just weird, yeah.
It is weird. It's also weird because I always make the point that most people, men or women, don't have careers. Most people have jobs.
Yeah.
And most people don't like their jobs.
No. It's so funny. It's so funny with women where they like hate the patriarchy, they hate the man, and they work for the man.
Oh, yeah.
It's like you would rather...
The man that does not care about you.
Does not at all. And you would rather... I'm not even saying that they're choosing this over being some trad sourdough baking, stay-at-home mom, which again, if you want to do that, that's totally fine. But they're dedicating their life to a cubicle and somebody who hates them, and they're choosing not even, to not even date or consider men because that's so important. And they've just been utterly lied to, and it's so hypocritical, and it doesn't make sense at all. It's like you're working for this Fortune 500 company run by a bunch of dudes that literally do not care about you, that are paying for you to freeze your eggs, are paying for you to fly to different states, to abort your children, because they want you to come back and keep focusing on your career. That's insane to me.
It's insane because this increasing divide and decline in marriage, decline in fertility, decline in birth rate, all of these things long-term will kill a society if they're not dealt with.
That's what Elon talks about constantly.
Yes, there are nations that are, I've spoken about him multiple times on my show, but it was such a fascinating conversation. I spoke to a demographer named Stephen Shaw, who's perhaps the world's leading expert in birth rates and birth gaps and just overall demographics from country to country. And, well, firstly, every single developed country except Israel is below replacement birth rate. South Korea is down to about 0.7.
Their government is flailing.
0.7 births per woman. So what that means in real terms is that for every 100 South Koreans alive right now, there will be an average of 4 great-grandchildren.
That's crazy.
So when we talk about these issues, like it's not just, dating is difficult or these concerns about marriage or whatever. It's like people are just not even, fewer and fewer people are even just coupling up and having a couple,
well, there's so many people that are literally just throwing in the towel. And a lot of men specifically are just saying, I'm done. I'm not even going to try.
And do you know what's wild about it is like, I totally get it. It's not my perspective.
Yeah.
That's not my perspective, and I don't think that's the best idea. Yes, but I do understand it because, I think the wants and desires and fears of each sex are often not that well understood by the other one. That's why I asked you that question. So if in terms of what I know, like the sort of men's fears are, because people often say, like, especially conservatives say, like, men are afraid of marriage. I always say men are not afraid of marriage. Men are afraid of divorce.
Yeah.
Okay. Particularly,
well, the whole legal system is set up against them.
Yes. Yeah. Right. So they're looking at stats and they're like, what? And they're also kind of looking around. It's not worth it. Yes, they're just like, why would I sign up to that? Particularly if they're not religious, because I'll be totally honest with you. Like if I had no faith, I don't think I'd even consider getting married. I'd just be like, why on earth would I do that? Right? To me, okay, it's deeper than that, and due to both my faith and the family I come from and certain traditions, it's like, yes, I absolutely will get married and have children. But from a purely secular perspective, if I didn't have those beliefs and have certain things modeled for me, I'm like, man, I totally get why increasing numbers of men are just checking out
and it's
of
interesting
that
because
and just
marriage
choosing to
is
date and
biblical. Like marriage is, and that's why it's so interesting to me when people who are not
it's supposed to be
when people who are not of faith get married and make a whole big deal of it, which is great. I'm glad that they're committing to each other, but it's so interesting in the way that they toy with marriage. I think that honestly is one of the biggest reasons why the divorce rates are so high, is because people don't look at it as a sacrament. They don't look at it as anything deeper. They look at it as throwing a party.
They say it's just a piece of paper.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it doesn't really matter. We're just doing it. It's the tax breaks, and we want to have a big party, and it's fine. And so by default, they're looking at it as something that can just be thrown away after a couple of years. And so, I mean, even from the female perspective, I look at it, I don't know if other women do, but I don't think I would put myself in that situation if I didn't believe that it was a sacrament, because what if you get pregnant and have children? And now, I mean, it is risky. And I think ignoring the fact that it is a lie, and is not helpful.
Yeah.
So that's why I think that the cultural conversation
I have a
is so
question for you,
important.
actually, Brett. Which is, I know your parents got divorced, and it sounds like it wasn't the most amicable of situations. So, how did you maintain? I know people who experienced that, and it totally sort of
jaded them,
and put them off the idea of getting married. Like they were just like, that institution doesn't work. Like I've seen it multiple times and I'm not seeing it working.
Yeah.
And then I also have seen like the flip side, some of the people I know who are like most pro marriage and who have they also went from that. So I'm just wondering, especially in your sort of teen years and early 20s, how you processed that.
So I always wanted to be a mom.
Okay.
That was most, before saying that I wanted to be married, that was the driving factor. I desperately want to be a mom. That's all I've ever wanted to be. When I think back of like, what would be your ideal career? And I think a lot of it comes from how amazing my mother was, and how much I respected all of her decisions and the sacrifices that she made. I just look at it as the most important thing that you could do. And so I think everything kind of fell into place after that. But I knew that I wanted to have kids, and I was raised in a more traditional household, and you have kids within a marriage. So I think that was part of it. But I think I saw how destructive the wrong marriage can be.
Yeah.
And I saw, my friends who had parents that are desperately in love and will never divorce, and how amazing their childhoods were. And those parents set an incredible example for me, and I kind of saw what was. And so I think a lot of this has been propelled by wanting to give our future children what I didn't have.
Yeah.
It was also very cool. Alex comes from a very, I would say, traditional family.
What's his background?
We're actually raised in the same hometown, Chattanooga, Tennessee. He went to the same high school that my brothers went to. His picture is in my brother's yearbook and has been in my mom's office for 15 years, which is the coolest thing. It's so cool. When we first started dating, she was like, I'm going to go see if I can find Alex. And there he was. His 9th grade picture, which I just love. It's kind of like the invisible string theory. We were always kind of like dancing around each other at different points in our life and then met at the right time. But he comes from a family of 4. There's 4 siblings, and his parents are still married and are, madly in love, and just raised really great kids. And meeting him and looking at how they all turned out and how his parents, go about their marriage was just a kind of another like signifier of like, this is what I want. Because I know that it's possible.
Yes.
And I also saw with my parents, again, going back to like how the wrong marriage can be so detrimental, they were so unhappy. Yeah. But I didn't see that, and maybe I'm just a hopeful person and a resilient person, but I did not see that as, okay, well then I don't even want to risk that. I saw that as, I'm going to go out and find the right person so that doesn't happen to me. Because I saw with my friends' parents, that thing that I'm talking about with Alex, where their lives were made better because of their spouse, because, the husband, massively succeeded in his career because of the support of this wife, and she was such an amazing mother, or she succeeded in her career because now she had this support system and they were growing together. And my parents, it was the exact opposite. They're both wonderful people that are so wrong for each other. My mom is very dominant. My dad is not. I think that caused resentment on both sides, which was really, really hard. And it was hard to watch as a kid. It was hard to be part of, but I'm also grateful for it because I turned out the way that I did, and I have a good perspective about it. So I think in that situation, the most positive outcome that could have come out of it happened with me. So I didn't want that. And so I think that just motivated me more than anything. I've always been somebody who's like, if something goes poorly, I'm going to turn this around and make it even better.
Yeah. This is something this is an area I wish conservatives would talk about more, which is not just push, get married, but talk more about how to know the right person.
How to marry the right person,
How to marry the right person. I think there's a lot of push for get married and do it early and do it
with
fast.
No caveat and with no nuance.
you need to give some people some like real guidelines here.
I think it's pretty dangerous
because rushing some people in their early 20s into a marriage, as you said, marriage with the wrong person can be destructive. Have people just marry your high school sweetheart. If I'd married my high school sweetheart, it would have freaking it would have been one of the worst decisions of my life, right? Like for me personally,
it works for some people.
God bless the people who do me.
But they knew at that time that they had lucked out and they identified that until they moved forward. But I'm sure
family plays a role in that, and
exactly,
people around
and their circumstances. But no, I agree, because you'll sit in a room with these conservative high school students, maybe they're 18, 19 years old, and people speak to them and say, just get married, have kids, you're going to save America. I agree. The family is super important.
It's not that simple.
No.
Yeah.
It's, marry the right person, and that will change your life, and that will change the culture.
Yes, and how to navigate the marriage itself. These are the questions I ask my I'm gonna have my parents on my podcast.
I love that.
I actually need to.
Yeah,
I really need to.
And also how to navigate the engagement process, and even I'm so grateful Alex and I did, premarital counseling, which I think was so important, and we got some,
Is that with a church or?
It was with the person who officiated our wedding, who's a pastor. Yeah, it wasn't through an official church, but and that was so important because even though we were, we didn't really have anything to work through. There wasn't any tension points that we had to hammer out before we got married. It was such a great foundation of just laying everything out and talking about communication and expectations, and really going back to the Bible and talking about man and woman and the design of marriage, and really just kind of starting this off with a really strong foundation. And I think a lot of people just rush into it.
Yeah.
Again, it's like the party. I want to be a princess, especially for women. I just want to have the party. I want to spend a bunch of money. I want to throw the big thing.
People think too much about the wedding and not enough about the marriage.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I wanted to. That was probably our only argument, was that I wanted to elope for that reason, because I was I did not want to put any attention on it. I was I don't want to spend the money. I don't want to do whatever. But he wanted a wedding.
That's a green flag, by the way.
Yeah. But he wanted a wedding, and I was like, oh gosh. But it was for a good reason. I was like, oh my gosh, Alex, this is so, why do you want this? Do you want to put on a show? I honestly got concerned for a minute, and he said, no, because I am making a public commitment to you. And he said, I don't want to run away and do this in private. He said, we can if you really want to, but it's important to me that we stand up in front of our families, in front of our friends, the people who made us into who we are, and that I declare in front of all of them and before God that I'm committing to you that this is not something we're doing quickly and in secret and that we're not taking seriously, but this is something everybody's involved in. And I was like, okay, well, I can't argue with that. Yeah. So, you lead, I'll follow. We'll do the wedding. But yeah, I think there's a greater emphasis on the piece of paper and checking off the party and getting the dress. So.
I think the intention is good, but it's a bit like if someone had financial issues or they had debt, and my advice to them is, just make more money. Yep. It's it's not technically wrong.
Yeah, but it doesn't
It's
help.
Technically right, but it's not, I'm struggling with weight loss. It's exercise more, eat less. It's technically right.
Yep.
But
it doesn't get to the deeper issues.
Yeah, you need to actually deal, especially given the backgrounds that people are coming from.
Yep.
So I'm very, very blessed to, not just in my immediate, but in my wider family, which is absolutely gigantic. The divorce rate must be certainly under 5%, maybe 2% or something like that. So I'm not so worried from my side, but I'm totally aware that there are millions of people out there who have never even seen a marriage work out.
Yeah.
Given the community.
Well, Alex was worried about that with me. I actually don't think he was as worried as people in his life were. Yeah. Because on paper, I've got a whole slew of issues. To be honest, that's why I think people ask me how did this work out? How are you here? Because my parents' marriage didn't work. Yeah. And there are a lot of issues, and I have a brother that is in an institution, and is my schizophrenic brother is nonverbal. He has not spoken in years. He was homeless for many years. I watched him OD on the streets of Los Angeles. My teen years were rough. Yeah. My father's mental illness was really rough, and that was right in my face, watching this person that's supposed to be this leader of your household and this strong figure, just watch him crumble and not have that example was really hard. My brother dying when I was 5 years old absolutely wrecked my family. My family
what did he pass away from, can I ask?
He had a cardiac arrest.
Okay.
Yeah, he was a competitive rower at his high school, and he was on the rowing machine, and he had a heart attack.
In a gym?
Yep.
Whoa.
No previous heart issues. Autopsy showed nothing. My mom now thinks that it was diet and lifestyle related. And she asked some of those questions at the hospital and after the fact, and the doctor kind of pushed her aside and said, no, it wasn't the energy drinks that he was eating. No, it wasn't the processed food. But I think now, as more information has come out about the food that we eat and our vaccinations, I think that she feels a bit, it doesn't change anything, obviously, but I think that she feels some validation of maybe there's some answers there. That's why she's such a huge fan of RFK Jr. and of Nicole Shanahan and the Make America Healthy Again movement, I think in so large part because of my brother and because of what happened and the fact that we had no answers. He's an identical twin. My brother Reed had no healthy issues. I was the one who came back when we all did EKGs, for the next 10 years. We all were in every single year getting all of these heart scans because it was so actually traumatic and was very sudden. I was the only one who came back with any kind of problems. Like I've had irregularities on EKGs. But his identical twin had nothing. There was nothing genetic that they could point to. It literally just came out of nowhere. The high school didn't have defibrillators on campus at the time, so there was no way to resuscitate him. This is just a testament to my parents, but they could have sued the school. They could have fought this. They went and they bought defibrillators for every room on campus to try to prevent that from happening to any other student. But I had a wonderful childhood in many, many ways. My mother is incredible. I was so blessed in many ways. I didn't really want for anything, but emotionally it was very, very difficult. It was very tumultuous. I did not have a lot of stability. And so because of that, I was always so worried that I would never meet anybody who was as stable as I wanted, that had that stability that I craved. Because I didn't have it. That's what I wanted. And I always felt like such damaged goods. Like, I come from this family that is so messy.
Yes.
And what's that going to look like to somebody? And for Alex to come in and think that was interesting and that was a testament to my character and who I've become, and to take it all in stride and not hold it against me in any way and say, okay, well then, I'm going to be with you as you grow from that and as you come out of that, was so incredible. And I had never felt that kind of just unrelenting love and support. And I was terrified of it for so long, especially with his family being so, like, I know my mother-in-law is going to watch this. I love you. But I know she's going to watch this. And, but they have this really, really lovely cookie cutter, their immediate family specifically. It is the most amazing thing. They love each other so much. They're so close. It is such an inspiration. Yeah. I remember meeting them and being like, I cried before I went and met his family for the first time because I was so scared. Because I had never been, or I had heard about them, and I had heard how wonderful they were. I had met his brothers, and everybody just talks so highly about his parents and their whole family. And I literally sat in my rental house in Nashville, and I sobbed because I was so afraid. Yeah. I was like, what do I even do in this situation? And so, I don't even remember how we got on this discussion, but, I guess it was, coming from that broken home and what propelled me, but it was that desire to have what I didn't have, and I was going to push through anything to make that work. I was going to get over the fear of being the black sheep and the broken girl to get it. But that's what propelled me, and I'm so grateful that is the mindset and the attitude that I did have, because I think it would have been very easy for me to roll over and fall into the same patterns and pitfalls that my parents did, and that I've seen a lot of people fall into in our culture. I think it would have been very easy for me to fall into what I saw in Hollywood growing up, in those behaviors, the sexual behaviors, the substance abuse, the desire for fame, the materialistic attitudes, all of that. It was all around me. And I look back every day and I just thank God that wasn't me, because I think my life would have turned out very differently.
Amen. Well, shout out to your mom.
That's the moral of every story, honestly.
Shout out to Alex. And Brett, what's next for you?
Oh, gosh. We need to get through this election. That's what's next for me. I think that's like what I think we're all like holding on to this roller coaster for a ride. We're going to get through that. Comment section is still just like a rocket, and so I'm excited to keep growing that and grow it along with this family and audience that we've created, this whole community. And so I take that, such a responsibility. So I'm excited to keep growing that. We have Pendragon coming out soon that I'm so proud of, and it was an honor to dip my toe back in acting and to do it in, with such wonderful people where I didn't have to worry about the messages that I was putting out in the world and not agreeing with them or having to hide my political beliefs, but literally just to get to focus on the art. It was very cool. It was, we had people that were excited to be a part of it because it was a Daily Wire produced project, and we had people that, were definitely on the left and were just happy to be there telling a great story. It felt real. It was like we were in this bubble of like, we're just creating great art. We're creating a great story. I think that'll come through in the project. So we have that coming out soon. Alex and I have this farm and that we're building together, hopefully starting a family soon, God willing. So a lot of very exciting things that we're just going to keep on keeping on.
Awesome. I love what you're doing. God bless you, Brett.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Onward and upward.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks for your time.